London in the 1960s pulsed with music, money, and menace. The Beatles were rewriting the sound of youth while neon signs glowed over Soho's late-night clubs. But behind the swinging skirts and pop anthems lurked a darker rhythm, one set by the East End's criminal underworld. Newspapers splashed the Kray twins across their front pages, calling them the kings of crime, their sharp suits and public bravado making them almost glamorous. Ronnie and Reggie were household names, a brand of danger the public could recognize. Yet, away from the camera flashes and celebrity acquaintances, another pair of brothers quietly tightened their grip on London's shadows. Their names rarely made it into print. There were no photo spreads of them stepping out of limousines or posing with famous singers. The Blundell brothers preferred the darkness, and those who crossed them learned that obscurity could be far more terrifying than fame. Local whispers painted an ominous picture. Some said the Blundells ran the dockside warehouses after midnight, where crates of stolen goods vanished before sunrise. Others claimed they collected debts with silent efficiency. One knock at the door, a cold stare, and the debtor's world changed forever. Where the Krays thrived on public fear and headlines, the Blundells thrived on silence. You could fear what you saw on the front page, but you feared even more what you couldn't see at all. They emerged from the crumbling streets of Limehouse, a place where war damage and poverty left children with hard edges and quick tempers. As boys, Martin and Clive Blundell learned early that fists spoke louder than pleas. Neighbors remembered two quiet lads who rarely smiled but watched everything. By their teens, they were already rumored to run errands for black market traders, moving stolen cigarettes and rationed goods long after the post-war shortages had ended. Unlike the Krays, the Blundells avoided the spotlight. They didn't swagger through clubs or court celebrities. Their suits were sharp but plain, their cars unremarkable. This anonymity was their weapon. A rival gang leader once joked that you'd spot the Krays before they spotted you, but you'd never see the Blundells coming. Weeks later, that rival's warehouse burned to the ground in a blaze that fire investigators quietly labeled suspicious. Detectives who tried to track them down found only fragments, a few frightened witnesses, a trail of cash that evaporated into offshore accounts, rumors of policemen who looked the other way after fat envelopes slid across pub tables. One constable recalled seeing Clive Blundell in a back-alley card game and described him as a man with no temperature, neither hot-headed nor cold, just eerily controlled. It was that control, that calm, that chilled those who encountered him. As London danced to rock and roll and the Krays posed for the press, the Blundells tightened their grip on the East End like a silent chokehold. Their operations stretched from illicit betting dens in Whitechapel to smuggling routes along the Thames. Every move was calculated, every threat delivered without a raised voice. When a young dock worker disappeared after refusing to cooperate, no body was ever found, yet everyone on the river suddenly paid their dues on time. By the mid-60s, seasoned criminals whispered that the Blundells were the ones to fear, not the Krays. They had no need for showmanship. Violence came to them like a second language, spoken only when necessary, always with finality. Their name rarely appeared in print, but in the hushed corners of East End pubs, it carried the weight of a gun pressed to the back of the skull. And so, while the Krays played to the cameras, the Blundell brothers rewrote the rules of London's underworld. Their empire was built not on headlines, but on dread. No photographs, no autographs, only a blood-soaked trail that history almost forgot. The Blundell brothers were born into a corner of East London that seemed forgotten by time and mercy. Post-war Limehouse still smelled of coal smoke and damp brick, a maze of crumbling terraces where rationing lingered and opportunity came only in shades of gray. Their father, Harold Blundell, worked the docks when he could and drank away the wages when he couldn't. Their mother, Elsie, stretched meager meals with watered broth and stale bread, her eyes carrying the permanent worry of a woman who never knew if tomorrow's rent would be paid. Martin, the elder by 2 years, was quiet but calculating, a boy who watched everything and spoke little. Clive, wiry and restless, had a fuse as short as a struck match. Together they survived alleyway brawls and the constant taunts of older boys who sensed weakness in anyone who hesitated. But the Blundells rarely hesitated. By 10, both could throw a punch with precision. By 12, they were feared in their schoolyard for an almost mechanical efficiency in fights. Violence, at first, was a shield, defense against bullies, a way to protect their younger sister Nora. But it quickly became something else. Martin discovered that a well-timed glare or a deliberate pause before striking was often more powerful than the blow itself. Clive found that the sound of someone's breath catching in fear sent a strange thrill through him. Fear, they learned, could be wielded like a weapon, and unlike fists, it didn't tire. Their first real crime came almost by accident. One rainy evening, the brothers slipped into an abandoned warehouse to escape a downpour. Inside, they found crates marked with shipping tags and an unattended pallet of cigarettes, worth a small fortune on the black market. Clive suggested taking a few cartons. Martin, already thinking 3 steps ahead, suggested taking them all. That night, they carted the boxes through side streets under the cover of fog and sold them to a local shopkeeper who asked no questions. The profit dwarfed anything their father could earn in a month. The rush was intoxicating. Soon, small thefts became planned raids, quick break-ins of storerooms, silent lifts of valuables from distracted market vendors. By their late teens, they weren't merely stealing. They were running a protection racket. Pub owners along the Thames learned that a quiet visit from the Blundell boys, now young men with ice in their eyes, meant business. A single warning was enough. Glasses left unwashed behind the bar might be found shattered one morning, or a delivery truck might mysteriously lose a wheel on a busy night. Payment guaranteed safety, refusal guaranteed chaos. What set the brothers apart wasn't just their brutality, but their calculated cruelty. They never shouted. They rarely left visible marks. When a stubborn butcher refused to pay, Martin simply stood outside the shop every day for a week, silent, hands clasped behind his back, staring through the window as customers entered. Trade dried up in 3 days. The butcher paid double. Their signature became the message without a word, a quiet visit, a slow nod, the unspoken promise of violence. One rival, a local thief named Freddie Cole, learned this lesson too late. Cole bragged in a tavern that he'd undercut the Blundell's prices and stolen one of their suppliers. 2 nights later, his prized racing pigeons were found dead, necks neatly broken, each bird laid in a perfect row across his doorstep. Cole vanished soon after, and no one dared ask how. By 20, Martin and Clive had outgrown petty crime. They understood that fear, properly cultivated, required no constant fight. It seeped into conversations, altered the decisions of men who'd never even met them. Dock workers began slipping them information about valuable shipments, not for money, but out of a need to stay on the right side of the brothers' silence. The Kray twins flaunted their power in nightclubs and newspapers, but in the damp alleys of Limehouse, a different legend was forming, one written in whispers. People said the Blundells didn't need to be seen to be obeyed. Some swore you could feel them enter a room even if they never crossed the threshold. And for Martin and Clive, that invisible presence became the ultimate currency, fear refined to an art, and the first true foundation of an empire that would one day challenge London's most notorious names. By the early 1960s, the Blundell brothers had turned quiet intimidation into a thriving underground economy. What began as stolen cigarettes and pub insurance blossomed into a web of extortion, smuggling, and illicit gambling that threaded through the back streets of East London like hidden veins of coal. They moved like ghosts through the city's industrial fog, their presence felt but rarely witnessed. Martin was the strategist. He studied the docks and warehouses along the Thames as if mapping a battlefield. He knew which foreman liked to drink late, which watchmen could be bribed, and which merchants were desperate enough to look the other way. Clive thrived in the field, meeting contacts in pubs, making lightning-fast deals, and delivering unspoken threats with a glance. Together they worked like two halves of one relentless mind. Their operations began with the river. Cargo ships brought everything from French wine to American electronics, and the Blundells learned to skim the best without leaving fingerprints. A midnight crane might malfunction, a crate might vanish between ship and warehouse, and by dawn, the goods would already be in a locked storeroom miles away. Dock workers who assisted them were rewarded in thick envelopes of cash. Those who refused soon found themselves out of work or, worse, too frightened to sleep. But theft was only a foundation. The brothers expanded into illegal betting dens hidden behind barbershops and unmarked doors. These rooms smelled of stale smoke and desperation, packed with men hunched over card tables while a lookout watched the street. The Blundells collected a percentage of every game, enforcing discipline with a ruthless efficiency that made cheating unthinkable. One gambler who tried to short them on winnings was found the next day with 2 broken fingers, each wrapped neatly in a white cloth as if bandaged by a careful nurse. They also cultivated a network of corrupt officials, low-ranking policemen, customs clerks, and a few local politicians willing to trade silence for steady cash. Martin understood that bribes were an investment. Pay the right man once, and he'd pay you back a dozen times in information. Soon the brothers knew of police raids before they were planned, allowing their dens to empty in minutes and their contraband to disappear into the mist. What made the Blundells so feared wasn't the size of their empire, but the precision of their cruelty. They avoided the loud shootouts and public brawls that brought down flashier gangs. Their violence was calculated, surgical. A rival bookmaker might simply fail to wake up one morning, his lungs filled with river water though his clothes were dry. A bartender who pocketed their cut might open his till to find a single pigeon feather, no words, but a promise of what could follow. The East End soon understood that a knock from the Blundell brothers was a final warning. One pub owner described how Martin stood in his doorway for a full minute, silent, before nodding once and leaving. The next day, a brick crashed through the pub's front window at opening time. No more messages were required. The weekly envelope was ready by nightfall. Even the Krays, basking in their celebrity, began to hear the whispers. They knew of a pair of brothers who never posed for photographs, who didn't need bodyguards because fear itself cleared a path. Some say Ronnie Kray once suggested a meeting to keep the peace. Martin reportedly sent back a single word: unnecessary. By 1964, the Blundell network stretched from Whitechapel to the outer docks, with fingers in smuggling routes that carried everything from stolen art to uncut diamonds. Their money moved through offshore accounts, laundered via front businesses so clean the taxmen tipped their hats. Yet they remained nearly invisible. No public sightings, no interviews, not even a police mugshot. For the ordinary Londoner, they were an urban legend, a story told in hushed tones over pint glasses. But for the criminals, they were a very real, very present force. "You don't cross the Blundells," one longtime fence muttered to a reporter years later. "You don't even say their name too loud." Their empire was not measured in territory but in dread. While the Krays courted fame, Martin and Clive perfected the art of fear, an empire built on silence, where the mere suggestion of their involvement could stop a deal, close a shop, or drive a rival into hiding. In the underworld of 1960s London, that made them untouchable. By late 1965, the Blundell brothers' empire stretched like a dark web across the East End, but cracks had begun to form beneath the surface. Years of meticulous secrecy had protected them, yet the very network they built, dock workers, bent policemen, frightened shopkeepers, was also a maze of weak links, and one of those links was about to snap. It started with a heist that should have been routine. A freighter out of Antwerp carried a shipment of Swiss watches worth a small fortune. Martin mapped the job with his usual precision. A short-handed night crew, a single guard known to drink on shift, a dockside fog forecast thick enough to hide a ghost. The plan required 10 minutes of silence and perfect timing. But when Clive and two trusted men reached the warehouse door, a floodlight snapped on. Sirens wailed. The guard hadn't been drinking. He'd been tipped off. They barely escaped into the black water between the piers, leaving one accomplice behind to face the police. Under interrogation, that man, terrified of the brothers yet more terrified of prison, gave the authorities the first concrete descriptions they had ever received. "Two of them," he whispered. "Brothers. One tall, quiet as death. The other, eyes like a blade." Detective Inspector Gerald Havers, a seasoned investigator tired of the Kray circus, seized the opportunity. For years he'd heard the whispers about an invisible pair running rackets the Krays only dreamed of. Now he had a name, Blundell, and a witness willing to talk. Havers quietly assembled a task force, avoiding publicity to keep the brothers in the dark. But secrecy works both ways. The Blundells sensed the shift almost immediately. Martin noticed unfamiliar faces on the docks. Clive spotted a gray Ford tailing him through Whitechapel. They changed routines, burned records, and tightened their circle. Yet paranoia gnawed at them. Every ally became a possible traitor, every knock at the door a threat. Then came the second betrayal. A mid-level bookmaker, eager for leniency after a separate arrest, traded information for freedom. His testimony sketched the brothers' entire operation: gambling dens, smuggling routes, bribes to customs officers. Havers finally had enough for warrants, but he wanted a clean takedown, something irrefutable. The police strike came on a bitter January night in 1966. A dozen unmarked cars fanned out across the East End, while plainclothes officers converged on the brothers' Limehouse safehouse. Inside, Martin and Clive were counting cash and discussing their next move when the sound of splintering wood shattered the silence. Clive reached for the revolver he always kept under the table. Martin grabbed his arm. "Not here," he murmured. "Not like this." The standoff lasted only seconds. Floodlights flooded the small flat, and the brothers emerged into the freezing air, faces expressionless. Witnesses later said they looked almost relieved. But arrest was only the beginning. The trial that followed was a study in shadows. Few witnesses dared appear in court. Those who did spoke behind screens or under false names. Evidence surfaced of thefts, assaults, and at least 3 disappearances, but the brothers' careful planning left little that would stick. The prosecution leaned heavily on the testimony of the captured accomplice from the Antwerp job and the bookmaker's detailed account of the gambling operations. Throughout the proceedings, Martin remained calm, hands folded, his eyes unreadable. Clive glared at the jury with a cold fury that made even seasoned officers uneasy. Reporters, eager for a new crime sensation, dubbed them the Invisible Twins, a name they despised but never contested. After 6 tense weeks, the verdict arrived. Guilty on charges of armed robbery, extortion, and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. The suspected murders could not be proved. Each brother received a 30-year sentence. As the judge read the punishment, Martin simply nodded once. Clive smirked as if daring the court to keep him caged. The East End exhaled in collective relief, but the silence left behind was uneasy. Some feared retribution from loyalists still on the streets. Others whispered that the brothers had hidden fortunes and could buy their way out. From their cells, the Blundells spoke little to the press, granting no interviews, leaving no memoirs. Yet even locked away, their legend grew. People claimed to see their influence in every unsolved dockside disappearance, every gambling den that paid tax to an unnamed collector. Whether real or imagined, the fear they'd perfected lingered long after the cell doors closed. The trial of Martin and Clive Blundell ended with the clang of cell doors, But their absence did not dissolve the fear they had so carefully cultivated. If anything, the brothers' imprisonment deepened their mystique. Londoners who had never seen their faces now whispered their names as though invoking a curse. Inside Wandsworth Prison, the Blundells adapted with the same cold precision that had built their empire. Martin treated incarceration like another business venture, quiet, observant, always calculating. He organized black market trades of cigarettes and contraband tea, gaining influence over both inmates and certain guards. Clive, more volatile, enforced their authority with sudden surgical violence. A shiv slipped into a pocket here, a calculated brawl there. Even hardened criminals kept their distance. "They don't need a gang," one inmate muttered. "They are the gang." Outside, the vacuum they left behind became a battlefield. Smaller crews scrambled to claim their gambling dens and dockside routes. Some succeeded for a time, but strange accidents befell those who bragged too loudly about replacing the Blundells. A rival bookmaker was found unconscious in an alley with no memory of who struck him. A warehouse owner who stopped paying the old insurance suffered a mysterious fire. Whether these incidents were coincidences, acts of loyalists, or proof of the brothers' long reach, no one could say. Yet the effect was unmistakable. The Blundell shadow stretched far beyond prison walls. Detective Inspector Gerald Havers, who had orchestrated their capture, admitted years later that he never felt the case was finished. "We put them away," he told a retired officers' gathering, "but we never really stopped them. You can cage bodies, not reputations." He recalled receiving unsigned letters, each a single sheet of paper bearing only a date, each date corresponding to the sudden closure of a suspected Blundell gambling spot. Journalists occasionally tried to resurrect the story, hoping for an interview or a sensational confession. Martin never replied. Clive, once or twice, sent brief notes written in his precise, almost elegant script. Truth is a matter of perspective, nothing more. The press, frustrated by the silence, eventually turned its attention back to the Krays, whose violent exploits remained easier to package into headlines. Years slid by. In prison, the brothers aged, but did not soften. Guards described Martin as chillingly polite, a man who could negotiate a favor with nothing but a quiet look. Clive grew grayer and slower, but his eyes retained the knife-edge gleam that had terrified East London. Younger inmates approached them for protection or advice, creating a new generation of disciples who spread the Blundell ethos of control through fear. When Martin died of a stroke in 1991, his funeral drew a small, silent crowd. No photographers were allowed. Men with weathered faces and heavy coats stood in the rain, saying nothing, their expressions unreadable. Clive, granted a brief escorted visit, stood at the graveside and did not shed a tear. After the service, he returned to prison without a word, his silence more eloquent than any eulogy. Clive outlived his brother by nearly a decade. Finally released on parole in the early 2000s, he disappeared almost immediately, choosing a life of anonymity that fit him as comfortably as the gray fog of his youth. Rumors placed him in Spain, then Ireland, then back in the East End, living under another name. No photographs ever surfaced. Some insisted he was dead within a year. Others swore they saw him watching from a street corner, the same cold eyes scanning the crowd. Today, the Blundell legend remains a phantom thread in London's criminal tapestry. Ask an old dock worker about them, and you may get only a wary glance. Search the archives and you'll find scant records, a few mugshots, yellowed clippings, trial transcripts that read more like fragments than history. Yet in the hushed stories passed between aging gangsters and night shift bartenders, their presence endures. Two brothers who proved that fear need not shout to be absolute. Compared to the Krays, the Blundells left little physical evidence. No flashy clubs, no celebrity photographs, no sensational memoirs. But their power lay in the invisible. They built an empire of silence, a reign sustained by the knowledge that the unknown can be far more terrifying than the known. Long after the Kray twins became pop culture anti-heroes, the Blundell brothers remain a darker whisper, a reminder that the most dangerous predators are often the ones you never see coming.